Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to another edition. Good evening. Hello there, Denise, Gary Spikes, Rebecca. Good evening, Rebecca. So, Brian Barber, Val. Who else we got in here that's sliding in? Henry, welcome. Midwest, hello there. You know, I am still packing to the LBL, Tracy.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes.
You're going to be taking a lot of stuff with you, ain't you?
Oh man, every time I think I'm done, I find something else. So I have no idea. It's like, where am I going to put all this stuff? So how are you doing, Tracy?
You're going to have fun. Before we go too much further, I want everybody to see something here. I got this from Grizzly Chris.
Oh,
got it in the mail the other day. Thank you so much, Grizzly.
Absolutely, brother.
It's very, very. I was expecting. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but man, this is actually quality.
Yes.
This is a good deal for the price, and you also blessed it, right?
Yes, it is blessed.
Yes, I appreciate that, man. That's a highlight of my day when I got that in the mail a couple days ago. So thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome to your real Leon.
So if anybody wants to order something, I suggest you ought to check out Grizzly stuff, man. It's some good stuff. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, I'm glad you got it. So what have you been up to?
Really just super busy, man. Super busy. I apologize to everybody for last week. The rain down here got me, and then rain this week too. And long story short, I just got to get the basement fixed.
Yeah, I hate to hear that. It's terrible.
Yeah, definitely.
It really is.
No, everything's going well, Grizz. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. I'm wrapping everything up. I mean, I'm gonna look like the Beverly Hillbillies when I go to the LBL. So
I wish I was going with you, man.
Yeah, it's all right. I have no idea. I mean, I may have to unpack to repack. So yeah.
That's always good though, man. That's good. You don't want to forget anything either.
No, no. I mean, when I went to Walmart today, she was like, "I'm coming over to your house for dinner." I'm like, "This is not dinner." She's like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "Camping." She's like, "Man, we all eating some gourmet food or something." I'm like, "Hey."
No, that's awesome, man. That's great.
Welcome, Rita. Virgil Kane, welcome. So, what we got going on tonight?
Hey, so we got an interesting guest tonight, Anna Maria Manalo. She is an author, but she also grew up with paranormal experiences. So let's get her on her. We'll let her explain herself.
Welcome, Anna Marie. Come on down.
Hi, how are you? Good evening.
Good evening. I'm telling you, I know what you saw. You saw Bigfoot.
Okay, yeah, right before the show. I can't figure out what it was, but I would tell you, I walked in there, I had the laptop, and I continued on with the show like nothing happened. I bolted the door if that was possible, and I sat in the sunroom looking out for it. And it
Everybody
was
in the
gone.
audience would tell you, you live in Pennsylvania, you have woods, and you had yellow eyes out in the tree line. That was Bigfoot. So, yes. So.
Grizzly's a bit of an expert on that.
Yeah, you don't believe in Bigfoot, do you?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's Bigfoot.
I have a story about that from someone in Central PA who encountered one because she popped some popcorn. And
What?
it started scratching in about that door. I'm serious. She told me the story because my old college roommate lived out there. She invited me over, and she said, "So I hear you're writing stuff." And I said, "Yeah, I'm getting ready to see if I could find a publisher." And she said, "Well, I got a story here for you, but I don't know if you like monsters." I said, "What kind of monster are we talking about?" And this woman was working at a local Kmart, came home, and, she was in the middle of nowhere. There were woods in front of her, woods to the side of her. There was a farmhouse up ahead, and she was popping popcorn.
Shut
She
the
was
front
by
door.
herself. What's that?
Shut the front door. And it attracted Bigfoot?
And, well, it was the back door. She was in the kitchen, and she popped some popcorn. And there were scratches. And then the farmer across the way came out with a gun and he was signaling to her about there was something that was at the side of the house standing there. And the guy told her it was about 9 feet tall, and it looked like it was wearing some kind of a, like a gorilla suit. But the guy knew what he was talking about. It's just that she never figured anything like that would happen to her. Popcorn.
Brian Barber, Gary, we are buying some popcorn, and I'm going back to the store in the morning getting a whole bunch of popcorn.
There you go. Hey, wait a minute. Was it buttered? Buttered popcorn.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Buttered. I think it was the butter, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
I bought 3 pounds of thick extra maple brown sugar bacon for the trip. So,
well, that's good.
Yes, see, Gary,
Sounds good.
hey, my maple bacon brings them in. See, we think alike, Gary. Yes. So, yeah, popcorn. Interesting.
Definitely. Well, tell us about yourself, Anna. What got you? I know, like I said, I've been reading up on your bio and some other things, and you're from Philippines, right? And you had some issues. You experienced some encounters when you were a child with your father.
Well,
If you want to talk about that?
Yeah, if I can make it as brief as possible, which is pretty much a long story, but I was born and raised in the Philippines, and it was a small hamlet at the time that we ended up living in by the name of Little Baguio, Baguio, if everybody can pronounce that. Little Baguio is probably now a big town because I haven't been back there in a long time. But during the time when we were living there, it pretty much consisted of a few dwellings, and then there was this set of townhomes that were built with a creek in the back. And it was where these things were starting to take place, right behind the townhomes, where there was this creek and there were all these ancient trees that kind of like hovered and towered over the creek. Now, back then, before, there was a population explosion, there were not that many people that lived there. And my father, who was a writer, just like I am now, used to work from home, was probably one of the first few people who worked from home back in the 60s. My mother was a housewife. She, at the time, had a degree in journalism, but she hadn't used it. They were young. They had just gotten married, and then 2 years later had me. They moved in there, and the apartment dwelling, which was all townhomes up and down, were pretty new. So we know it has nothing to do with the structure, but whatever was happening with the ancient trees in the back. My father claims that he sees these creatures, one specific one, okay? And I'll let you guys guess what it is just by giving you a description, and you can come up with your own summation what you think it is.
Yeah.
So, as soon as dusk settles, the back of the townhomes all have huge windows facing out onto this creek. And along the creek, there are all these huge trees. One of the trees, what happens to be facing the window where my father sat, where he would write, there was something that would unfold itself out of the tree. It then would proceed to attach itself onto the window, and the window stretched from the bottom all the way up to the ceiling. In the tropical country where you normally don't have air conditioning, you kind of like open the windows to the breeze. So the only thing between him and this creature was a screen and some, what do you call the steel bars that they used to have kind of like a decoration in Spanish times. So this thing would unfold itself, and it had a wingspan of 6 feet, and it was about anywhere from 7 to 9 feet high. You're probably thinking I'm drinking.
Not yet, but I'm getting ready to.
It started to intently look at him, and this is now happening almost every night as he's writing on his typewriter, Smith Corona. And it had such a heavy feeling to it. It was a sense of menace, almost like a sense of someone that wants to attack him, is what he explained to my mother. and it had the eyes of a cow, and it had like a pointed chin like a goat, and you could tell kind of like the horns on the top of his head, so you could just get an idea. The wings were the wings of a bat, and it looks like leather. He was the only one that could see this creature. The only other people in the house was me, and I was only about, I think when it began when I was about a year old. So I was still in the crib. I was right next door in the nursery. Okay. Their bedroom was on the other side of his office. So his office was in the middle. One day, and everybody has a live-in maid in the Philippines, so it's not like we're affluent. It's just a regular thing.
Yeah.
She comes up to knock on the door to let him know it's dinner time. Dinner time over there is usually late, like 7:30, 8 o'clock. She doesn't get an answer, so she proceeds to open the door, and lo and behold, there it was, looking intently down at him. And you could hear this kind of like a humming sound, and all the windows were open. All the crickets, the cicadas, or whatever animals you had out there, you couldn't hear a thing. It was as if they were all drowned out, and this creature just was looking directly down at him. And here he was at his desk by the typewriter, facing out in the window. His head was bowed because he didn't want to see it. She started screaming. She was screaming to the top of her lungs. I started crying, supposedly next door. She ran to come and get me. At that point, my mother was already out in the hallway coming up from the kitchen. She came upon it for the first time. This is after several months of him claiming seeing something. And no one in the family believed him. They even sent him to a psychiatrist to figure out if there was something wrong with him. He was getting progressively depressed. He wasn't eating. He wasn't sleeping. He was afraid if he slept, it would take his soul.
Hmm.
She walked in, my mother did, grabbed a cross from the other side of the wall, and proceeded to charge against it. There was a young woman who was like 22 years old at the time. And the thing took one of its wings and covered itself and started to effervesce down to the ground. And this is a second floor window. It was almost like a vampire. It was reacting to the cross. And then it just disappeared.
Hmm.
Mm.
That's wow.
So what
So
is that?
you had witnesses. That's a demon to me. First thing I thought of, and because I'm not familiar with Mothman, I just happened to think Mothman, but then I started thinking in Philippines. I'm not sure if something like that would be down there. What do you think, Grizz?
Yeah, some people said like something like the Goat Man or the Jersey Devil. You know, is what it sounded like. But I'm not familiar with Philippine culture or anything, so I don't know.
So
So
as it
that's
goes on, he didn't sleep. He stopped eating altogether, and then people were watching him. His parents were very concerned, because they were only in their early 20s at this point. And my mother had asked one person, one particular relative, make sure you don't leave him alone because I got to go to work. She comes back. The person apparently was bored, left him alone, and he ended up committing suicide just to escape the creature.
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, that's terrible.
Yep. That was a long time ago. I mean, I recounted this trying to figure out what it is. And I think that's what started me off on trying to, I guess it's a great curiosity to figure out what is out there, which has led me to this day, that has led me to write these stories that come from other paranormal investigators, as well as just people straight off the street telling me experiences that they've had.
Now, I'm not trying to bring up anything that you might not like me to bring up, but
Go
so
ahead.
throughout time, from your mother and the maid seeing it, And you obviously got got a description from them. Did anybody at that particular time happen to draw up something of it to kind of make you better understand it as well? Just curious.
I did not even know anything about it
Oh
until
yeah,
I was in college myself.
yeah.
And
I was curious if your mom or the maid maybe drew something up, to kind of give a better idea as you get older, and uh, just curious, because I mean, it would be really hard, I would think, to explain it to, I don't know the Philippines, but I would assume police or uh, some entity came out there to investigate. I was just curious if at that point in time, if they, granted, I understand back in those days, it might have been hard to explain it to them. But
well,
I was just curious
Tracy, yeah, to respond to your question, the police did not become involved simply because they would not be believed.
yeah,
Um, my grandfather, who was a medical doctor, was the one that pronounced him dead. They rushed him to the scene. He was promptly taken out, and then the parish priest, because it's a 99% Roman Catholic country, refused to have him interred at the church. They did not want him buried on sacred ground.
wow,
So how they handled that is still a puzzle to me. As I said before, I didn't really get any pictures or anything, any kind of representation.
yeah,
My mother was traumatized by the whole thing. She was just a young woman. And at the time, it was very taboo to even discuss anyone being depressed in the family. So it was swept under the rug until I went to visit. And it was in my 17th year. I was just in college. My mother invited me to accompany her back to the Philippines to see my father's relatives. My grandfather was still alive. My paternal grandfather was alive. And when we got there, he invited us over for dinner at his house. And I'll tell you this for a good reason, because what happened, you'd have to be seated. I hope you're seated
yeah.
for this one. I entered the house, and this is the house where my father was raised. It had a very large dining area that could fit probably 12 people. On the one side of the dining room, if you'll picture a series of windows, one right after the other, that opens up to the night sky. So my grandfather was very eager to keep in touch with me as the only granddaughter of my father, from his son. And so we proceeded to pull out family albums. He started showing me different pictures of how my father looked when he was a child. It so happened his younger brother, who's still alive, his wife was with child. She sat next to me. We were talking for a while, and a slip of paper fell out from one of the albums. So I leaned down to pick it up and retrieve it. I put it on the table, and my mother looks at it, and her sister-in-law looks at it, and she said, "Oh, you should have this. This is yours to keep." So I looked at the piece of paper, and gentlemen, I've never told anybody, never knew the circumstances of my father's death until that day. But when my friends in elementary school used to ask me, "How come it's your uncle picking you up from school? How come we never meet your dad? How come it's always this, that, and so on?" And I would say things like, "Oh, he died from smoking too much." And then eventually I suddenly switched and I just said, "Oh, he killed himself." And my friends would go, "Ooh, ah," at this point I was in middle school and they were really shocked. And you know how kids are, they get dramatic and everything. I feel
Right.
so bad.
Yeah.
And there was no way for me to know the facts that I knew that I shared with them until that evening when I saw that piece of paper in my hand and it verified for me that I was correct. And then my mother said to her sister-in-law, "She doesn't know." And the sister-in-law just was in shock. Here's a 17-year-old that never knew the details. She says, "I'm really sorry." She grabbed a piece of paper. As soon as she grabbed the piece of paper, all the windows opened. And there must have been like maybe 10 or 12 of them just in the series, all open to the sky, and a whole bunch of roaches Cockroaches flew into the room.
Oh, wow.
And at this point, the servants were putting food on the table. If you could just imagine, we were just getting ready to eat. They were moving the albums away and they just descended on the food. They were all over my hair. They were just all over the walls, literally covering the table and the walls. And we fled up the steps towards the second floor. And my grandfather was beside himself. He was so embarrassed. He says, "This is a very clean house." He took it that way
Yeah.
because he's a very matter of fact kind of guy. He said, "This is a very clean house. I can't imagine how this could possibly happen." And the sister-in-law had the presence of mind to start saying a prayer. And to this day, I think it was the St. Michael prayer that she was saying. And suddenly they all just disappeared.
Mm,
Wow.
wow.
So, thinking back with the way you described the entity or the demon with wings and such, I mean, did you they see it? Do you see any correlation between that and the roaches by any chance? Just curious.
It was the feeling that came over me when I realized that something had to have told me how he passed, that I wasn't making things up. It was validated by the entry of these
Yeah.
insects. It was almost as if it was telling me, it's time you knew. But what a way to validate it. I
Right.
mean, the hairs on my arms were standing. I mean, the whole room was just infested. And this is not that kind of neighborhood that would be. I mean, uh, this just does not happen over there. I mean, I'm sure there's places in the rural areas where they do for one reason or another, but this is a suburban neighborhood.
Do you mind if I ask what was on the paper?
It basically said he exsanguinated, which is bled to death.
Oh, okay.
He had slit his wrists.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought maybe
No, it's okay.
okay.
Really, it's all right.
Wow. That's really wow. That's a I'm a loss for words. How about you, Grizz?
Yeah, I mean, so the signs of the insects, like she said, and people in the comments, I mean, maybe one or two, but the windows and in that amount, yes, that's definitely showing something demonic.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the
So,
sister-in-law never forgot that. Years later, when she wrote me, she'd message me, email me, or whatever. She'd say, "I still cannot forget what happened when you actually found out how your father passed away." Just the way and the temperature. That was the other thing too, Grizzly and Tracy. The
Mhm.
temperature in that dining room was burning because this is tropical weather we're talking about. And even at like 8 o'clock at night, it's still very hot in the Philippines in the middle of the summer. So for the temperature to plummet 30 degrees, I mean, we were all shivering in that room.
right.
Wow.
Sounds
Um,
like right out of a horror movie, doesn't it?
yeah, it does. That would be a
So, so after that, I mean, what else could be scarier, right? When I write these things.
yeah, that would be like Grizzly said, a screenplay.
Right.
You know, yeah, because I know that the people watching are paying attention, and you got my attention right off the bat. Um, and with you being a screenwriter, have you put that into one of your novels at all, or is that just too personal?
That was actually my very first screenplay that I pitched. Actually, I went to Burbank to pitch it. I went on to write about 12 screenplays. The very first one is called From Within Me. I entered it in contest, and it ended up being a quarterfinalist, a finalist, and it won a few um, pretty prestigious awards, I should say. One of them being Big Break. But as you know, with Hollywood, as with anything else, with a very highly competitive business like that, you have to know someone inside. You
Yeah.
had to have been trained in film school, and all I had to my merit was 3 weeks of online screenwriting, which was the extent of my training in writing. I was not an English major. I was not a creative writing major.
Right.
So
So
you just brought up that you had 12 screenplays. Is that correct off the bat? Or
yeah, I
throughout?
started, and here's how it started, Tracy. All these things just kind of came together. Um, Back in 2008, a friend of my husband's invited us over for dinner. And her husband actually was training to be a MUFON investigator, Mutual UFO Network. And I got very curious. The binder was right on the coffee table. I started leafing through it, and the rest was history. I bought the manual, trained for it. And then in 2008, when I graduated in April from MUFON, we hit the Bucks County flap. So we had like over 700% sightings. There was only 2 people in Bucks County assigned to be a MUFON investigator at the time. So we were literally swamped with all kinds of cases. And some of those cases never made it to the MUFON website simply because the people were too intimidated. They're afraid that somehow their employer would find out that they were a little, Lulu. And so they would tell me, stop me on the street, tell me about it, etc., and say, don't tell this to anybody. We don't want this recorded on the MUFON website. So I changed names, changed locations, and they ended up being screenplays years
Wow.
later after I left MUFON.
Wow.
Have you heard of MUFON, Chris?
Yes. Yeah. MUFON's been around for quite some time.
I'm a novice on that stuff, so
Yeah.
forgive.
I've actually had a lot of directors on some shows.
Really,
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. So if you don't mind, Anna, for like a novice, for me, from what I just took from that is MUFON basically somebody will get a hold of you to investigate some of their UFO sightings. Is that correct?
Yeah, in this case, it was routed through a website, and we got assigned the cases by the director. In this case, it was John Ventre. He's probably retired at this point, but at the time, he was director for Virginia, Pennsylvania, and parts of Delaware, actually, all of Delaware. At the time, there weren't that many investigators in 2008. So it was almost like a full time job. And I was working at a public school, which you all know is pretty conservative. For someone who's moonlighting as a MUFON investigator, you really don't mention that when you come to
Yeah.
work.
Right.
Although the kids love it. I mean, the kids find it very entertaining. They love the stories and everything. And at some point, a couple of the science teachers caught on what I was doing. And then, what really transpired then is we were asked to be on a show, a TV show of all things, which aired on Thanksgiving break. And this was at the tail end of the Bucks County flap. And that's when, the public school system caught on, someone in there in their ranks is actually a MUFON investigator. So I had to stop. I did a conference and then basically said, look, I got to throw my hat in. It's not working for me during the day. Maybe when I retire. So I went on from there to actually pitch these scripts. And then I said, okay, some of them I'm going to turn into books. And then some people started approaching me in the strangest sorts of ways. And I started writing their experiences. And some of them are investigators. The latest one I have is a paranormal investigator who happens to be a medium. And she talks about a case that stood out in her mind that was practically unsolvable. And that's something that's going to be released this June.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
That is cool. So you started out with the horror one, the horror screenplay that you
Hmm.
talked about growing up, and then you dove into the UFO screenplays. Did you
Yeah.
dive into any other outside of the UFO or outside of the horror side of things?
I think at some point I also delved into cryptids, but I didn't have too many reports to tell you the truth. I've only had one report, the one we talked about earlier in
Yeah.
the show, that was in Central PA. But a great crop of the stuff that I get is just people encountering very strange phantoms, and sightings, abductions. I have a book about an actual lifetime abduction, and people will probably differ with me on this in some ways. My background is more supernatural rather than paranormal in the sense, I'm looking at actual entities from the netherworld. But this particular book, which is called Night Visitants, is based on the account of a gentleman who's a ufologist. And his angle on this particular experiencer is that she had been abducted since she was a small child.
Oh, wow.
When I started writing about it, and you have to interview these people over a period of time before you put together the plot.
Yeah.
You have to have all the information before you start sitting down and actually writing it. And it came to me and to my attention that I seriously had doubts whether she had been abducted or whether it was some other agent that was visiting her in her bedroom at night.
Interesting.
Now, uh, you mentioned in your bio, as I was reading through it as well, different hauntings, catastrophic events like the World War II. Can you talk about any of that? I mean, what made you dive into that particular catastrophic, those events at World War II?
So when I started writing my books, the first book I wrote delved a little bit, as with every writer out there, it starts autobiographically, um, and then ends with different accounts of different people all over the world. I traveled a lot in my time. So people, I don't know, maybe I have that kind of face. I don't know what it is, but people would sit down and start a conversation, and inevitably it would go right into, I had this very strange experience, they would preface. I'm not sure how many people would believe me, but it sounds like you would believe me. So of course I say, yeah, try me. And then they proceed to tell me that. And then I tell it in a book. I change their name and everything just to protect them. So that was an anthology of different stories, different accounts, and it was called Portal. The second one I met through a woman, and she passed away last April. Sadly, she was a very wonderful person. I met her at a birthday party of all things, at a huge Chinese restaurant. She ended up, her nameplate was right next to my plate. Didn't know her from Adam. She tripped and she almost fell right on my lap. Literally, the story fell on my lap. And at the course of the evening, as we were dining, she was telling me about her life in Germany as a child and how she had a very strange series of encounters as she tried to flee the Gestapo. They had taken her mother, put her on the train because the mother was keeping a child who was disabled, and they discovered, and they don't just hunt down Jewish people, they also hunt down anyone who's disabled, anybody who looked different. So this was one of those tragic stories. But it went on from there because then she entered the Bavarian woods. And that's when she ended up encountering all kinds of disembodied beings. Uh, it's actually pretty graphic. And this was only the second book I had, but her stories to me, which ended, I wouldn't give the spoiler away, but let's put it this way. She went through a time warp.
Interesting.
And so this is actually a juxtaposition between two different things, between seeing spirits of people who were tortured in war and also going through something that she felt was a portal. She couldn't quite explain it to anyone. She puzzled over it. The only person who could relate to her was her father, because he went through something similar, as he also escaped from his end. He was all the way up in northern Germany, and she was trying to get to him because she knew he had survived.
So,
Does that answer your question?
yeah, I believe so. So you have the talent of taking somebody's experience and putting it into a novel of that sort. Is that correct to say that?
Well, I wouldn't say a novel. Obviously they're novel length, because I think the shortest book I've ever written was about 240 pages. But because it's nonfiction, it makes it more riveting, because people normally don't realize that these things can happen. I mean, we read books all the time, and then you get the preface that tells you that this author is thanking the person for sharing all this information to them. These are all true stories. There's only one fiction story that I wrote, only because out of the three men, one had declined and it went to about 50% truth. When it goes down to 50% truth, I call it fiction. So I labeled that book fiction for that reason, because I had to fill in the blanks myself, being that I wasn't supplied the information. The person who declined happens to still live in the area. And if he were to tell his story, everybody would know who it was coming from.
Yeah.
But 90% of my books are nonfiction, including the one that's coming out.
Okay.
Fascinating.
What do you define as tulpas?
A tulpa is an interesting topic, because I think that there was only maybe a couple of pioneers in the past. And in 1908, there was a woman who was an anthropologist by the name of Alexandra David Neal. And she, eccentric as she was, went to Tibet. And she learned the art of trying to create an entity out of the simple power and desire of your mind. We have a lot of things that are untapped resources in our brain. We're only actually using about 15 to 20% of our brain. If we used 100% of it, and you guys know this, we would probably be levitating and healing people and doing all different kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to wax religion, but as Christ said, we were made in his image. He didn't mean just because we have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, and a mouth. He meant something deeper than that. So Alexandra David Neal learned from the lamas in Tibet in the period of about a few years how to actually conjure an entity out of nothing, which would give them personality, desires. It would follow her bidding. And she emerged out of that to come back to London and explain what went on. Of course, people boo-booed her and thought she was crazy. And now we come to Canada, and I think it was, don't quote me, 1950s, when there was an experiment, and they made up this interesting, friendly person. That became a movie of sorts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie where there was a rabbit named Harvey. And I forget who the actor is that starred in it, but it was all based on the idea of a thought form. You call it a tulpa. Um, and that was something that I decided I would put into the topic of The Infernal, which is the book I released last year, late in fall. And this one is also based on a true story about a young girl who lived in Connecticut. Sadly, the tulpa was not your friendly rabbit or your friendly monk. The tulpa came out of a demonic book. She had gotten her hands on a demonology book that had 60 plates of different types of demons. And because she was an artist, she started drawing this demon, one particular one, for hours on end until she had it perfect. And lo and behold, what happened next, gentlemen?
It's brought to life.
people started seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. That's pretty cool. Uh, that that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on here, because I find this stuff fascinating. Um, uh, uh, and I like the fact that you are able to take do the nonfiction books like that, and to take people's stories and put them into words. Um, so I'm looking at a book right here now, The Way Through the Woods. Would you mind explaining what that one is about? If that, without giving everything away, right?
Well, that was the one I was talking about earlier about the German woman I met at the restaurant.
Oh, I thought that
Uh,
was Portal.
no,
Portal
Portal is the very first one with several stories from different people
that's right. Okay.
all over the world. And that one has the account of the Mothman creature that I talked much earlier on. So Way Through the Woods is the second one, and that was the one about the time warp.
Gotcha.
Um, and, so there's elements there that people would call sci-fi. So I guess if you're a science fiction fan, you would enjoy that as well. It was not intended that way. She never thought life would turn that way. But to this day, and she was, knock on wood, when she was alive, she would talk about that and how it puzzled her so much, how that could possibly happen, but it did.
Hmm.
My third book is also an anthology, and if you guys are interested in haunted antiques, that would be a book for you, because that's about attached objects that have some strange people attached to them.
Now, what's the
Wow.
name of that book?
Haunted heirlooms.
Haunted Heirlooms. Okay, I'm looking at that right now. So, if you don't mind, what start from that thing right there, because I'm definitely interested in hearing about attachments to antiques.
Okay, Tracy.
I'd like to know what all, and not, you ain't got to explain everything, because but I'm interested in that. How did you
Uh,
come about that? What kind of people came to you and showed you what they had, and any proof to it, anything like that?
I'm laughing because I recently had a book discussion group last year. A friend of mine put together a book discussion group, and she asked them, which one would you like to read? And then we'll invite the person who wrote it. And they picked Haunted Heirlooms because someone had just purchased the barrister's bookcase. And now she's wondering if there's something behind the bookcase. And it does revolve around four stories from four different people, and they were all antique dealers. Back in the day when I was in my salad days, when I was in college, I had a fascination for antiques. I couldn't afford them because I was just, a poor student. So I would just look at them, go to flea markets, see what I could find that, people would unwittingly think was meant for the trash, that could be my treasure. I stumbled upon a chair, a beautiful chair. It was in great condition. It was all in brocade fabric and a beautiful pattern. And a friend of mine had a beetle, one of those VW vintage beetles that are no longer on the road. And he said, ask the guy how much it is, and I'll throw it in the beetle. Guy tells me it's $36. I said, oh my gosh. Yeah, piece of furniture, an antique, I'll take it. So off we go in the Beetle, and the next thing you know, a woman in flappers is showing up, standing right outside my dorm room. I was living in a dorm, and people are telling me, you didn't have her sign in. And, she's partying all the time. She's always dressed to the nines. She's got high heels on and some strange tiara on her head. And, I was coming home from the library. People were confronting me. The room advisor was there. A couple of people who were in the hallway, were down there. And they said that, they're feeling really funny about that end of the hallway where I was because of this woman who was coming out of my room. And it just went on from there. So
Wow.
I would visit these antique shops. I had a friend whose parents owned an antique shop. As a matter of fact, he now owns the antique shop and he's getting ready to retire. Um, And they told me what antique owners usually don't tell you, that there are some things they acquire out there from wherever it comes from, and it just ends up being the most frightening experience. It is hard to get rid of. And it is just one of those things you just don't go calling somebody in and having it blessed, or having, whatever religion you are. It just does not get away from you. It becomes a feat trying to get rid of that object.
Wow. So I think Grizzly needs to get that chair.
She's right. She's right.
You've had an antique, Grizzly?
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
still have that chair?
The more you bless it, the worse it gets.
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have that chair?
No, I did. And here's the funny thing. I'll give this away because this is the first part of the book. It was actually one of the introduction. And what happened was, I had a friend who likes to run seances. Now, she's a self-styled, seance person. It's not like somebody said, oh, she's a good seance person. It was in college. She liked dabbling and things like that. So we didn't have any other way except to call. It was a Jesuit university. I'll give that away. We didn't want to tell the ministry. We didn't want to alert them of what was going on until finally a nun got hurt. This thing actually hurt someone. So finally, we had to get the chair out of there. We ended up putting it in a beach house. And that's when my friend came over and she said, let's do a seance and find out who owns this chair. So here we are, a bunch of, we were 18 years old. So we get in the beach. We get around the table. We put the chairs by the fireplace and this one chair right by here. And she starts saying all these things, puts down the salt and the light and the, whatever else paraphernalia she had. And she's trying to call it and summon it and ask for its name. And suddenly the wind just blows right through everything, blows all the papers. I mean, they're students, blows all the papers, and, things are toppling over. The vase topples over and we're running out of there like crazy, out onto the beach. This is a beach house. It's right on the beach. So the wind is blowing. This is now like, I think it's December. The wind is blowing and we're trying to get the chair out of the house. We're all outside. So finally, one of the roommates, it was 3 men. Actually, they were the ones in the infernal, the same people, except for the one. He backed out of it. He came in, put it right by the water line on the beach. He says, just let the water take it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Don't anybody touch it. We're just all going back. So they all hunkered down in somebody's dorm room. They abandoned the beach house for a couple of weeks. They break the lease. They get a rental in town. They come back, and the chair is still there. The tide has not taken it away.
Wow.
Finally, they decide they're going to break it apart. They can't break the darn thing apart. So they end up throwing it in the trash in some kind of neighborhood hamper. I don't think that's even allowed, but they did that and they got taken away. Finally it was gone. But no, I would never hold on to anything haunted.
I think somebody got it out of the trash.
Probably a gal in flapper. Well, that's weird that people saw her in the dorm room. That's wow.
Yeah.
That's creepy. I could only imagine your thoughts when they're telling you about it. Oh my gosh, I don't know nobody like that.
No, the creepiest part is they're telling me this, and I have to come back to that dorm room. It was a single women's dorm. Yeah. So I was in the room with this chair sitting right underneath the window as I was studying. And sometimes you could feel there was something there. Wow. You could feel something staring at you. So I started avoiding the room. And I would stay out so late, exhausted, to just plunk in bed and just fall fast asleep, just so I didn't have to deal with studying in the room or seeing something. It got that bad. So I
Mm.
wanted it out of there.
I don't blame you.
Yeah. Yeah. And the struggles are real. Yes.
Yeah, we my wife and I, we Grizz knows this. We collect old toys, and we had yeah tons of antique stores. Always say a prayer when we get them. Always say a prayer in the car. We always say a prayer before we walk into the front door and praise the Lord, hallelujah, knock on wood, whatever. Nothing bad has happened. Never really even heard a peep out of any of them. And I'm telling you, we have literally 1,000 old toys that, and I'm not talking little bitty things. I'm talking Fisher Price stuff that 1939s, 1930s, uh,
Mm-hmm.
40s stuff, and always wondered when it's going to get me. When I want to start hearing stuff. But so far, and now that I got this from Grizzly earlier, I
The
know it's not.
cross.
They're not going to come get me now. So yeah, I'm going to
I
hang
would
these
I
back.
wouldn't be saying that. You are like, whew.
You're right. You're right. I'm not taunting. I don't mean to taunt. Sorry, I don't mean to taunt. I just but no, no. I tell you what, that story right there is intriguing, fascinating, and terrifying at the same time. Don't you think, Grizz?
Oh yeah.
Wow. And you have that's just one of them out of those four. You said there was four in that book, right?
Yeah, yeah. So the other four are not from me. They're from the antique dealers. And
Yeah.
this is over the passage of time because people don't normally tell you things like that because then you'll start telling other people, and before you know it, no one's coming to the store. So I'd known them at that point 20 years because I've known them since, the early 80s. So at this point, they kind of had my confidence that I wouldn't betray, their names or the name of the store or where they're located. So I changed different things just to make it more obscure so that nobody could catch on. Oh, I think this is such and such a store or whatever. I mean, there's tons of stores over here too, where I am in my neck of the woods, but no one would be able to tell the difference. Um, one of them had something that was, well, I mean, it was also from World War II. And I always say that these things that happen in tragedies and wars always leave something that, because it was so evil, what
Mm,
happened to them, because it was so tragic, it just lingers and it just remains and the hauntings remain. There was an urn that came from World War II, and the lady who purchased it didn't even think to open the urn before she purchased it. Big mistake.
yeah.
So, what came out, you won't believe.
We'll have to read about that, huh? That's a definite. After whenever we get ready to get done here, obviously you can give us the where we can get your books and stuff. But before we do go, I just wanted to ask you about you got the current work coming out in June, Against the Forbidden Darkness. You mentioned that title a little bit earlier. Medium and her struggles to free souls. Uh, is there anything you want to talk about that while we have you on here?
Well, this one, it's interesting how many people you meet on Facebook, as you guys have met me.
Yeah.
This was actually a person who was an avid reader. She had purchased all my books. She loved all my books. She reviewed all my books, as a matter of fact. I started paying attention to her because she started telling me about the things that were happening to her. And this was even before The Night Visitants was written. And as time went on, I got to know her. And I'm thinking, because you meet a lot of people on Facebook, you just never know about them. You just never know about their veracity or what you're dealing with, right?
Mm,
Um,
Right.
and she finally reached out to me, made a phone call. And she was telling me some things about myself that there was no way anybody would know. It was just a conversation. Most of my conversations with her online had to do with her life rather than mine. The only thing she knew about me was that I wrote nonfiction. So out of the blue, she tells me all these different details that was currently happening to me. There was no way she didn't know any because she's long distance. She's far away. Matter of fact, she's in the Midwest. And every time she calls and clues me in, I sit down and I think, this has to be the real deal. There is no way. I mean, most people who claim to be psychic will ask you details and then send it right back to you as if they had guessed it. I mean, not all of them.
Mhm.
Okay. There is definitely a handful that are definitely legitimate. This woman did not know Adam about me
Yeah.
because I'm not that really easy to get to know. Um, and I was just floored. So after years and years of knowing her, I finally asked for her narrative. And this is the book that's being published in June.
Wow.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Wonderful. It was such a pleasure having you on the show. So how does
Yeah.
everybody find you and also to get a hold of your books?
Okay, so you can find me on social media. You found me on Facebook. I have a page there. I'm on Instagram under the Sinister Archives, also on TikTok. I'm also on Amazon under my name. You can also follow me on Goodreads. And I have my website, which is AnnaMariaManaloAuthor.com. All the books are described there. And if you click on the book, it takes you to a direct link into Amazon. Some of my books are on Audible for those that like to listen to them rather than read them. They're also on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. So we'll just keep going.
Awesome. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
You're
you.
always more than welcome to come
Thank
back.
you.
What do you say, Tracy?
No, great interview. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thanks so much for
and
having
don't
me.
forget, ladies and gentlemen, we got another show at 9:00 p.m. Eastern time. So from coast to coast around the world, we'll catch you in about an hour. So take care, everybody.
See you
See you
guys.
shortly. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.